The largest pandemic and conflict in Europe since World War II have awakened European leaders to the continent's dependency on other countries in ensuring its security foundation, from energy to communications. Faced with the current disadvantages of dependence, many policymakers have asserted that Europe needs a new and more robust pathway. China's Belt and Road, an initiative that uses geopolitics and infrastructure to reshape beneficial trade patterns, has caught the attention of European policymakers. There is a belief that the EU also needs a similar initiative to connect with other countries and strengthen its position. In today's World Affairs, let's explore this perspective and the related plans that Europe has been implementing. On paper, the EU should be an attractive partner for many low- and middle-income countries across the globe. It is the biggest market in the world. Its social model is widely admired, and it is less pushy on foreign policy alignment than either China or the US. Also on paper, Latin America should be the most promising place for the EU to press disadvantage home. The region is culturally close to Europe. It is largely democratic and shares the EU's founding values, and immigration from it into the bloc has been relatively easy to absorb. But when European and Latin American leaders meet in early July for their first summit in almost a decade, their attempts at collaboration will feel like starting, if not from square one, then not much further than square two. At best, the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, underway for decades, will get a political push towards ratification. The likely underwhelming summit is a sign that the EU has not contemplated, let alone articulated, what deeper forms of relationship it can offer non-members beyond traditional trade deals and association agreements. The first step to solving the problem, recognizing that it exists, is happening then, not before time. The construction of post-1945 European unity around economic integration conditioned leaders to seeing the world stage as a market square, a place to sell exports and source raw materials. A marketplace, however, is so easy to take for granted that one forgets it requires political underpinnings, which Europe was long content to let the US sustain. After the 2008 crisis, European leaders were too consumed by internal problems to adapt to America's increasing dereliction of this role. The pandemic and the war have boosted French President Emmanuel Macron's concept of strategic autonomy, but even this comes with a dose of solipsism. More than standoffish autonomy, the EU needs strategic engagement to get other countries more firmly on its side. Europe's neglect of the world contrasts with China's Belt and Road Initiative, which uses geopolitics and infrastructure to reshape trade patterns to its advantage, including by turning the heads of some EU states. The fact that Beijing has not fully succeeded does not mean it has been wrong to try. Its Pandemic Recovery Fund, new energy policy, and drive to promote technological and industrial investment have righted the balance that made some member states look kindlier on Beijing than on their neighbors. The war has rekindled the political will to use membership prospects to mold others in the EU's image. The current difficult dealings with Turkey should be a cautionary tale. That country was reforming until it was convinced in the 2000s that the EU's door was not open in good faith. The EU cannot afford to lose Ukraine in that same way. According to the Financial Times, what is missing still is a committed strategy for deep relations with countries beyond the conceivable membership candidates. This is not just a matter of securing critical minerals and metal supplies. It is about shaping a world where the EU remains relevant because it has more and closer allies on global issues such as the geography of supply chains, tech rules, multilateral governance, and climate change. That is a much higher stakes ambition than the EU has shown to date. It would require a commensurate devotion of both financial and political resources and partnership forms going deeper than conventional trade deals. This could mean new forms of participating in the single market itself or large-scale migration partnerships. As EU leaders contemplate how they adapt their institutions to a larger membership, they should also consider how to create tighter links with far-flung non-members. They should match China's ambition and aim for a global economy as centered on Europe as possible. But they should aim higher than Beijing in attracting countries not through financial entrapment, but by offering deeper, mutually beneficial links. One year after the European Union launched Global Gateway, a much-touted new strategy for infrastructure development around the world, Brussels is struggling to convince skeptics inside and outside the bloc that it really means business and that the EU can be a credible player in a game that China has dominated for a decade. Global Gateway aims to mobilize up to 300 billion euros from the EU budget, member states and the private sector by 2027. The cash is meant to help underdeveloped countries accelerate their green and digital transitions, while also benefiting EU economies and boosting the bloc's global influence. The effort comes in part as a European response to China's Belt and Road program, which since 2013 has channeled hundreds of billions of dollars into the construction of roads, railways, and ports around the world. Other Western countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, are also pushing their own foreign investment schemes. EU Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, said, Global Gateway is a values-based offer. Of course, it is also a geopolitical project. Infrastructure is at the core of geopolitics today. The question is whether these efforts are enough to make the EU stand out. China is estimated to have handed out up to $400 billion in foreign loans from 2014 to 2018 and claims to have signed Belt and Road contracts worth about $100 billion in 2022. Stefano Sannino, the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, the EU's diplomatic branch, said that Global Gateway represents a new approach to EU foreign aid, one that no longer focuses only on helping out the target countries, but takes more into account European interests as well, seeking to build mutually beneficial partnerships. It's a massive change, he said. As examples of the projects already financed and underway, EU officials cite a new fiber optic submarine cable that will connect several countries in Northern Africa and Southern Europe, and the EU's participation in the construction of a €5 billion hydropower plant in Tajikistan that will reduce Central Asia's dependency on Russian energy. Sannino said he expected the initiative to accelerate this year. Now we are at cruising speed. We should be able to have a much more significant impact on the ground, he said. In December, the EU gave the green light to 40 investment programs in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Asia-Pacific. But the scale of Europe's plans pale compared to the challenge, with Africa alone needing infrastructure investments to the tune of $150 billion per year. What Europe is offering is a drop in the ocean, said Solange Guo-Chellard, a researcher at ULB in Brussels. Critics of Global Gateway also point out that the initiative doesn't bring any additional funding to the table, instead drawing on resources already allocated by individual member states. It's not even clear how much of the promised money will actually materialize. Almost half of the headline-grabbing €300 billion are, in fact, private investments that the EU is hoping to generate with a system of financial guarantees. Looking at the attitude of investors, I'm pretty confident that they see the opportunity, said Reinhard Bütikofer, the chair of the European Parliament's delegation for relations with China. He said involvement by the European business community will also receive a boost from a business advisory group that is expected to be set up in the coming months as part of Global Gateway's governance. However, previous efforts by the EU to attract private sector participation in development projects have hardly achieved resounding success, with very little evidence of the actual impact of the financial instruments that the EU is using to attract businesses. Even Global Gateway's advocates admit that the program would benefit from more clarity about what its priorities are, and that there is a risk that it boils down to a simple repackaging of existing programs. Boutique Kaufer said, "Whenever there is a new promising concept, there is always a tendency within every bureaucracy to reframe what they have been doing for many years under the new headline. New label, but old wine is new wineskins, and that is obviously not what the Global Gateway initiative is supposed to amount to." As per analysis of the Financial Times, the EU could think of this more for more approach as Belt and Road with liberal democratic characteristics. That may seem unrealistic, yet it is of the deepest realism, for nothing less can protect Europe's interests if the US gives up on the liberal rules-based order after next year's presidential election. That's it for today's program. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.